Attende Domine et miserere, quia peccavibus tibi, a te vexum meum redemptor, oculos nostros sublimamus flattes, exaudi Christe supplicantum pregens.
Que viva Cristo Rey y que viva Santa María de Guadalupe. Amados hermanos en Jesucristo nuestro Señor, vamos a analizar un poco sobre la vida de Monseñor Marco Antonio Pivarunas, que es el líder en total decadencia por apartarse del magisterio de la Iglesia y permitir que se propague el error con su silencio, desde el momento que no tiene un documento donde firmado y rubricado, donde asegure que Roma apóstata no es parte de la Iglesia, con dejar correr y dejar hacer e incluso favorecer las tesis heréticas de Casisiacum, de favorecer a o decir que tiene la misma postura que del hereje de Marcelo Lefebvre en el 76. Veamos qué nos dice el obispo Marco Antonio Pivarunas sobre su niñez y juventud.
And I can't be grateful enough to have been born of a Catholic family. My mother was an immigrant from Italy. She immigrated here from, I believe, Solcedo, Italy, when she was 4 years old. Catholic, very much Catholic background. My father, he was born in Chicago, but my grandparents, my father's parents, they were from Lithuania, very Catholic family. And it was a beautiful time to grow up in the Catholic faith. I went to a parish school that had about 1,000 kids. I think I go back to 4th grade. The priest at the time came into our classroom to give a class instead of sister, and he drew a big mountain on the board, and he said, "This mountain represents life, and the top of the mountain's heaven." And he said that we're going up the Catholic road, but if you don't want to go up the Catholic road, all religions basically follow the same path to heaven.
Yeah, when did this venue, I should say, approximately?
I'm trying to think here now. This must have been about 67, 68. Wow. So that was very upsetting to my father. Like, why are we spending all this money to send you to a Catholic school if they're telling you don't have to be a Catholic? So very quickly, things were coming to a head at this parish. This parish was very, very progressive. And I'll never forget the day this priest gave a very liberal sermon. And right in the middle of the sermon, my father snapped his finger and said, we all got up, genuflected, and walked out. And I'll never forget that because the church was packed and we were up in the front. That was on, I believe, a Sunday. I remember the day very clearly. About a day or two later, I'd been home from school and my father was doing something in the kitchen, putting up some wallpaper or something. Doorbell rang and he said, "Go see who it is." And there was the pastor. And I went and said, "Father Madden's at the door." And my father said, "Well, tell him apologize. I would come and greet him, but I'm putting up this wallpaper. I can't, everything's wet right now. I got to put it up right now." So I asked Father, "Would you come in? My father's working in the kitchen. He can't come and greet you here." So my dad was very respectful. And Father Madden said, "You know about Sunday?" My dad said, "I know about Sunday." And so Father Madden said, "Well, that can't go on again." My father said, "Don't worry about it, because we're going to go to another parish. We're done." So we went to another more conservative parish. Something it is about.
Es decir, Monseñor Pivarunas vivió la época de los cambios. Él dice que de una familia muy católica, su madre de origen lituano llega a los 4 años de edad del señor obispo. Conoce perfectamente los cambios, el discurso, la impresión y las afirmaciones heréticas y de un padre, como él comenta, estricto.
Leonard McNamara is passing or distributing communion. A Novus Ordo priest, a modern priest, would come out and go over the table the modern tabernacle. And he'd go to distribute communion, and people would get up and walk away from him and go over to Father Leonard McNamara. So we know those people know that the Novus Ordos is not a good mass.
And did you know, Your Excellency, as a boy then, how did you feel about it? Did you understand what was happening, or was it more of obedience to your parents?
No, I understood, because I could see the fruits of what was going on. I remember my brother in the seminary, his first 2 years, things were very, very conservative. And then there was a drastic change when he came back, just a liberal, amongst the other seminarians, a liberal mentality. And now they were trying to introduce guitar masses, and instead of mass up in the church, they go down to the cafeteria and set up a table and all this. It was very, very, very liberal. And I know the battles my father used to have. My father would sometimes talk to the priest about, why don't you preach about the rosary or about Our Lady or something of this nature? And, unfortunately, things were going more along the lines of social issues and political issues as well. But I could see the battle.
Es decir, Monseñor Pivarunas vivió la transición. Su hermano, 2 años de seminarista, se hizo un liberal, según él dice. Se echó a perder. ¿Por qué razón? Pues por las enseñanzas perniciosísimas del modernismo.
My life to God, secure my salvation, and I wanted to put myself in a position where I would be most favorable for pleasing God and serving Him and saving my soul. And then it was by being a religious, I realized the good that could be done as a priest. I was told it was God's will that I begin studies for the priesthood. So those were long days of studies, and also at the time we were running both a grade and high school. And so very, very early on, I began teaching in the school. It began with 5th and 6th grade, 7th and 8th grade, and finally into high school. After Bishop George Misa ordained me in 1985, after 11 years, I was 26 at the time. I was working at Mount St. Michael's. We were running the high school. Back then, we had many, many border students. We think we have a lot of border students now here in Omaha, but I remember in 1977, our first year at Mount St. Michael's, 77, 78, we had 100 borders boys. So I took care of 45 border grade school, and there was 55 high school boys. So about 100 students. And then we had a lot of religious back then. We had I believe between seminaries and religious brothers, I think we had 65 or 70. So we had a very good number about Mount St. Michael's. But so in 1985, I was ordained so quickly because of the lectures on Our Lady of Fatima and also the changes in the church. They kind of go hand in hand, because Our Lady, besides her message of prayer, penance, amendment of life, she talked about communism, Russia spreading her errors. She also talked about so many souls going to hell and the need for prayer and sacrifice, praying the rosary. But she also gave that third secret that was to be revealed in 1960. And as we know, John the 23rd basically squelched the secret. And it was not without a good reason, because the changes in the church were very soon to come about. So we would give lectures around the country. And one thing that really made an impression on me for the need to stay put in one place is that I give a lecture up in Minneapolis, St. Paul. And I believe at the time we must have had about 170 people to lecture. And that by this time, for myself, this might sound archaic, but we had this, what kind of a project? It's not a PowerPoint. They didn't have PowerPoints back then. It was you get a transparency sheet and put it on something, and it would project it onto the wall. So you use these sheets. So when we're giving the lecture on Our Lady of Fatima, we always began with the rosary.
Aquí compartimos el documento del 20 de agosto del año 2002, donde el obispo Pivarunas pues autoriza asistir a la Santa Misa bajo ciertas circunstancias. Dice lo siguiente:
mis pensamientos con respecto a la cuestión de una CAM. Algunos clérigos católicos tradicionales afirman que es pecado mortal que los fieles asistan a misas en latín ofrecidas por sacerdotes católicos tradicionales que insertan el nombre de Francisco y el falso Papa en el canon de la misa. Aunque condenamos esta práctica, el estado de la cuestión es saber si los fieles cometen un pecado mortal por su asistencia. Un principio importante a tener en cuenta es que debemos tener la evidencia más completa y una enseñanza positiva antes de poder afirmar que un acto es mortalmente pecaminoso. Considere lo siguiente. 1. Teología moral y pastoral por el P. Henry Davis S.J., volumen I, Principios. San Agustín dijo sabiamente: ¿cuáles son esos pecados que excluyen del reino de Dios? Es muy difícil de determinar y muy peligroso de asignar. Sin embargo, habló de ciertos crímenes, como el adulterio, como obviamente mortales. Ese Raimundo de Peñafort habla en el mismo sentido. No seáis demasiado propensos a juzgar que los pecados son mortales cuando no tenéis la evidencia más completa. Y Santo Tomás: es peligroso decidir qué pecados son mortales, a menos que tengamos una enseñanza positiva que nos guíe. 1-2. El P. Martin Stepanich, Orfe MSTD, un sacerdote sedevacantista que celebró 70 años de sacerdocio, tiene un punto muy pertinente en su comentario al artículo del PCK. Si intentamos utilizar las palabras del Papa y de los teólogos anteriores al Vaticano II, ya citadas anteriormente, y hacerles decir que la asistencia a la misa uncam benedicto está siempre absolutamente prohibida bajo cualquier circunstancia, somos nosotros los que realmente estamos haciendo ese tipo de prohibición, no los papas y los teólogos anteriores al Vaticano II. Intente encontrar algo en los papas y en los teólogos anteriores al Vaticano II que prohíba total y absolutamente la asistencia a las misas uncam benedicto por parte de los católicos sedevacantistas tradicionales. Simplemente no está ahí. 3. Antes de la opinión del PCK en este asunto, ninguno de los clérigos tradicionales más antiguos, Mons, Gerard de Laudiers, Mons, Maquena, Mons, Carmona, Mons, Musei, P. Stepanich, etc., enseñaba que es pecado mortal para los sedevacantistas asistir a una misa uncam.
En ese sentido, amados hermanos, está la declaración de Acapulco de la sede vacante. Si la sede está vacante, la nueva misa es herética. Arzobispo, tus declaraciones en Acapulco, apoyo de 5 obispos. ¿Qué es lo que dice aquí? Que nos adherimos a él en sus valientes declaraciones publicadas que hizo acerca de la vacancia de la Santa Sede y de la invalidez e ilicitud de la nueva misa. Más adelante habla sobre la falsa misa, es decir, un falso papa, y uno que declara la sede vacante. Nosotros decimos y sostenemos que la aparición de esa nueva misa es también la aparición de una nueva religión, en la que ya no se adora a Dios, sino al hombre, en la que ya no importan los bienes del cielo, sino los de la tierra, en la que la felicidad consiste en una sociedad sin clases. Los que han aceptado esa nueva misa en realidad y sin darse cuenta, han apostatado de la verdadera fe. Se han apartado de la verdadera iglesia de que Cristo instituyó y se están poniendo en peligro su salvación eterna. Por esta razón, invitamos a los fieles a que consideren su actitud y vuelvan a su fe, de la que han sido desviados. En ese otro documento que dice, ¿cómo andamos después del conciliábulo pomposamente llamado Vaticano II? Dice que el altar consagrado era sustituido por una mesa, como lo hizo Martín Lutero en Alemania y Cranmer en Inglaterra, y que donde no podía destruir el altar, porque era artístico, lo dejaron, pero sin utilizarlo. Ante él colocaban su mesa para realizar en ella lo que ahora han dado de llamar celebración eucarística, pero no el santo sacrificio de la misa, que ha sido sustituido por la cena protestante. Causa fue esta por la que los católicos se dividieron. Unos advertidos de que todos esos cambios eran queridos y mandados por el Papa, entre comillas, arrastrados por una falsa obediencia a sus vergonzantes y asalariadas pastores, renegaron de la verdadera iglesia y se unieron a la apostasía universal, aunque más bien obligados por su propia voluntad. Siempre que tienen oportunidad de asistir a una misa católica, son presionados para que no asistan y amenazados con excomunión. Entonces, habla del padre Sánchez Riaga, se vacancia de la sede de la Santa Sede, invalidez de la nueva misa y nulidad de los 3 últimos conclaves. Entonces, ¿qué es lo que vemos en Monseñor Pivarunas? Simple y sencillamente vemos que está mintiendo. En esa otra carta que dirige Monseñor Carmona al cura párroco del 30, dice pues has dicho una estupendísima verdad. No soy obispo de la iglesia montiniana, que salió como abortiva del Vaticano II. No soy obispo de esa iglesia que, renunciando a los castísimos amores de su divino esposo, pretende unirse en adulterio con todas las sectas heréticas del mundo. De esa iglesia no soy obispo ni quiero serlo. Ese altísimo honor te lo cedo a ti y a todos los que, como tú, han apostatado. Pero si quieran o no, les parezca o no les parezca, soy obispo católico. ¿Acaso los excomulgados, los que están fuera de la iglesia católica, pueden excomulgar? Los excomulgados son otros, Tomás, son esos que, sabiendo que el modernismo está condenado por la iglesia, se hicieron modernistas sin importar la excomunión que el Papa Santo Pío X haya lanzado contra ellos. ¿Un católico está obligado a obedecer a quien, no siendo legítimo Papa, carece de autoridad? ¿Hay obligación de obedecer a los intrusos que, emanando de las logias, se infiltraron en la iglesia para por dentro destruirla? Es decir, ¿quién es el que hizo esa revolución? El falso Papa. Que tú y todos los clérigos de esa iglesia montiniana son tan protestantes como ellos. Solo así se explica el furibundo encono que tienen contra la verdad de la religión. Continúa Monseñor y dice Monseñor Pivarunas: la mente de la iglesia es que los sacramentos fueron instituidos por Cristo para la salvación del hombre. El canon 2261 refleja la mente de la iglesia, salvo lo dispuesto en el número 3. Los fieles pueden por cualquier causa justa pedir sacramentos o sacramentales a quienes están excomulgados, especialmente si no hay otro que los dé. Y en tales casos, el excomulgado, si requerido, puede administrarlos y no está obligado a preguntar el motivo de la petición. Ahora bien, en el canon 2261.1, ¿qué es lo que nos dice? Pero a los excomulgados vitandos y a otros excomulgados, cuando ha mediado sentencia condenatoria o declaratoria, solo en peligro de muerte, pueden los fieles pedirles tanto la absolución sacramental a tenor de los cánones 882 y 2252, como también, si no hay otros ministros, los demás sacramentos y sacramentales, en peligro de muerte. Entonces, aquí está mintiendo el obispo Pivarunas. En el punto 7 cita el obispo Pivarunas al padre Baker, sacerdote de inglés: dado la extrema anormalidad de una situación en la que Juan Pablo II es casi universalmente aceptado como papa, los fieles que de otro modo se verían privados de los sacramentos vivificantes tienen derecho, en mi opinión, a ignorar la lealtad profesada por Lefebvre y asistir a las misas de sus sacerdotes. Es decir, una situación confusa. Finalmente, ¿qué es lo que nos dice en la última parte? Nos dice lo siguiente el obispo. El obispo Mar Pivarunas y sus hermanos de la CMRI han proporcionado la siguiente declaración en relación con las llamadas misas una cum, es decir, en comunión con el falso papa, para ser anexadas a este artículo. La Congregación Religiosa de María Reina Inmaculada sostiene que los fieles católicos pueden solicitar los sacramentos a sacerdotes católicos tradicionales que lamentablemente ofrecen sus misas una cum. Aunque CMRI no acepta que Juan Pablo II, como legítimo sucesor de San Pedro, no considere a tales sacerdotes tradicionales que ofrecen misas una cum como cismáticos, porque si tales sacerdotes fueran cismáticos en el sentido canónico de la palabra, entonces se les exigiría el reconocer la vacante de la sede apostólica, que juraran ese error y fueran recibidos de nuevo en la iglesia. ¿Qué sucede entonces, queridos hermanos, con el obispo Pivarunas? Mucha formación teológica, vio los cambios, la corrupción, y ahora ante un falso papa, no ve problema mayor que en ciertas circunstancias se asista a esas falsas misas. O esas no son falsas misas, mejor dicho, a la Santa Misa en comunión con el hombre que pretende estar en el lugar de Cristo y obra en contra de Cristo. No es llevarlos a un grave pecado. ¿Por qué esa ligereza? ¿Por qué esa ligereza? ¿Qué no dice la teología moral de Ferreres en tomo 1? Sepan nuestros fieles que de ninguna manera les es permitido el celebrar juntamente con los herejes actos religiosos en que se tiene participación en la fe o común en las cosas sagradas, y que está absolutamente vedado asistir a los sermones que se predican en sus reuniones, o a los actos de su culto, de manera que parece que se unen a ellos. Pero esto, pues no le preocupa, no, para él no es interés. Entonces, ¿por qué pasa todo esto? ¿Por qué sucede?
I think you're a Catholic priest. This other man lecture between the lecture and the question and answer period, one of the friends, he was able to assist with some of these mass centers, and we got the seminary going. School was going well and growing. Our mass centers were growing. And then we had a very interesting situation. Now I'm not going to go into any of the particular details, but one of the heaviest crosses for me in my priesthood was a challenge that we encountered. And there was a mass center, a church, and there was an unfortunate falling out between the lay people and the priest. There were issues with the priest. I thought there were serious issues with the priest. And this priest successfully was able to, how would you say, I believe through misinformation, alienate the bishops of the United States from CMRI. So this was like 1990 to 91. And there was about 170 people at this church. All they wanted is the Mass. By 1999, the priests of Mexico, I got to know them very, very well. They were the Trento priests, the group that Bishop Carmona had started. So I had mentioned to the priest, I want them to have a meeting and discuss who would be a possible candidate to be consecrated as bishop. And that fell upon Father Martin Davila. And Father Davila was the one that accompanied Bishop Carmona to Spokane when I got consecrated in 1991. So I knew him very well. So I asked Bishop Dolan if he would accompany me, and down in Acapulco in 1999, we consecrated Bishop Davila. And then this past year, because of the situation with COVID and the restrictions of travel, Bishop Martin Davila was going to be down in South America. And I said, I think it would be really providential if you could consecrate Father Pio Espina. I've known him since he was a teenager down in Molinari, Argentina. We've gone down there many times. Comes from a very good Catholic family. His brother's a priest. And by the grace of God, Bishop.
Ahora bien, el obispo Marco Antonio Pivarunas, por una parte, sobre todo en pláticas, da una correcta, pero después hace lo contrario, bajo el pensamiento de la caridad, como es el caso de la una cum. No ve problemas en que los fieles asistan a la Santa Misa bajo ciertas circunstancias cuando están en comunión con un falso papa, con un anticristo que destruye la iglesia. Él no ve problemas. Que se opone al magisterio. Pero después dice que tampoco está de acuerdo con eso. Es decir, es otro lefebvre. Otro lefebvre. ¿Y qué nos dice en esta parte? Sobre la parte donde él nos habla precisamente de lo que es una falsa iglesia. Una falsa iglesia que sencillamente es insostenible. Pero
they do not have supernatural proof, and if God had so sent his Son into the world to reveal the true religion and work miracles and prophecies, supernatural events to prove the divine nature and mission of this church, this religion, how does it make any sense that anybody could just come up with their own religion and that man-made religion is going to be good, better, or just as good as the one that was revealed by God? Utterly bizarre. That's the reason why the first commandment, I am the Lord thy God, thou shalt not have strange gods before me. I know you've heard these things before, but we should not doubt the reality that this is the apostasy. Those men in Rome are false popes. They have no claim, title to anything. Now, it's interesting that when we think of this, this is what really actually divides the traditionalists today. The traditionalists have obviously different views about the papacy. And we have been accused of saying, well, you don't believe in the Pope. That's not the case at all. It's because we believe in the papacy that we recognize these men, there's no way these men can be Pope. Now, we'll just give you a couple of examples, but the one thing for sure is this, with regard to the concept of the papacy, Vatican Council I in 1870, Pope decrees something. It's not for us to just take it or leave it. If he's the Pope, it's going to be bound in heaven what he decrees. Now, obviously, we have popes and councils of the church teaching for nearly 2,000 years. Then all of a sudden, Vatican II comes along and just throws it out the window saying, no, we're not going to do this, we're not going to do that. We have the Canon 731 under Pope Benedict XV, 1917 code saying it's forbidden to give communion to Protestants, heretics. Vatican II, John Paul II, new code 1983, give them communion. We have the Catholic Church condemning the idea of worshiping with other religions. That's Canon 1258, the 1917 code. We have Vatican II authorizing it and encouraging it and practicing it blatantly. So if he were the Pope, Francis and John Paul II and all these others were Pope, and they're contradicting divine law, they can't be the Pope. There's an impossibility there. But there are some who, we call them recognize and resist. They say, well, he's the Pope, but we have to resist him. We don't follow him. That's not the papacy that Christ established, not the Catholic Church that Christ established. Then everybody becomes a Pope. Well, I don't like that. Well, I don't like this. I'll take this. I will take that. I'll become the Pope and decide what I'm going to accept from the Pope and what I'm not going to accept from the Pope. That's bizarre. It's crazy and completely contrary to what Christ has established. So the idea of the papacy, this is the dividing point amongst traditional Catholics. But I tell you this, I find it very interesting. Many of these people can recognize, and that's the sad thing, they can recognize the errors coming from the modern church. Like these 40 theologians who are accusing Francis I, Amoris Laetitia's apostolic exhortation, are accusing of heresy.
That's just my opinion. I think the important thing I'd like to share with you is this. When I talk to the Society of Pius X members, I say, I know you've probably heard many bad things about the Sede Vacantis, but really our position is that of the Archbishop Lefebvre in 1976. Such errors as at once schismatic and heretical, this conciliar church therefore is not Catholic. To whatever extent the Pope, bishops pronounce schismatic and heretical, this conciliar, they would say that the conciliar churches, the conciliar popes were Catholic enough to get elected, but they're not Catholic enough to get the authority. I think that's contradictory. So that's my opinion. I think the important thing I'd like to share with you is this. When I talk to the Society of Pius X members, I say, I know you've probably heard many bad things about the Sede Vacantis, but really our position is that of the Archbishop Lefebvre in 1970.
And they try to lead us in schism. And they say there are no pope now, no cardinal, no bishop, no Catholic Church. We are Catholic Church. I don't say that. I don't accept that. I don't accept that.
Jamás sus doctrinas de un modo metódico y en su conjunto, sino dándolas en cierto modo por fragmentos y esparcidas acá y allá, lo cual contribuye a que se les juzgue fluctuantes e indecisos en sus ideas, cuando en realidad estas son perfectamente fijas y consistentes. Ante todo, importa presentar en este lugar esas mismas doctrinas en un conjunto, y hacer ver el enlace lógico que las une entre sí, reservándonos indicar después las causas de los errores y prescribir los remedios más adecuados para cortar el mal.
When it comes to papal teachings on this matter, we've already read from Satis Cognitum, if the living magisterium could in any way be false, an evident contradiction follows, because then God is the author of that. Because Jesus said, he who hears you hears me. So if we look at perhaps, this is an example, and we can use many, the new Code of Canon Law promulgated by John Paul II, 1983. And
the United States to Michigan, to the Detroit area. I finished my studies of theology there. During that time, while I was there, Father Samuel was consecrated a bishop by Bishop McKenna. And then when my plan was to go back to Argentina and get ordained by Bishop Pivarunas down there in Argentina. But during that time, 2003, there was a lot of, problems. We had 4 or 5 presidents in 24 hours. So Argentina was a complete disaster. So Bishop Pivarunas told me, all right, it's not going to be wise to go to Argentina now. So, and he wrote a letter, he kindly wrote a letter to Bishop Sanborn asking him if he had no problem of ordaining me. So Bishop Sanborn said, it's up to you. So he gave me the option, and I said, all right, if the Bishop Pivarunas is agree with that, I will be ordained here. I was ordained on June the 2003. I've been there for 1 year and a half, more or less. And, as Father said, they followed the thesis. I was, at that time, the seminary was very, very free. I mean, I was allowed to follow the rubrics of Pius XII. I was allowed to choose the bishop who ordained me, even though the last Bishop Sambor ordained me. But later on, they got a little harder with that. That's history, But I was very friend of the bishop, now Bishop Selway. He was my companion at the seminary. I had a very nice remembrance of the seminary time. It was, they treated me very well. I felt like at my home, I was trying to get back to Argentina, of course, but the thesis was not a problem, and the rubrics was not a problem. After that, yes, they ask you for the thesis, and they ask you for following the rubrics of Pius X, which I'm not agree with that.
If I could just add something to that, we should not be surprised that there are differences of opinions amongst clergy, because if we could perfectly get along at every point, then what's the point of having a pope? But the pope is what unifies the church, and so there are going to be, without a pope, especially for a long time, there's going to be differences of opinion, and I want to really stress the difference is over policy and over things that are debatable that haven't been settled by the church, but on doctrine we completely agree. That's the Catholicity of the church.
I will strike the shepherd on the flock with being scattered, right?
So we have more, I tell people, we have more unity than you realize. We are in complete agreement in doctrine. The policy and debatable issues like the thesis of Bishop Gerard de Laurier, you can debate that. You can't, until the highest authority resolves it, it's a debatable question. The church allows that. So we're talking about more questions about the papacy. What's the difference between an anti-pope and a false pope? An anti-pope is when there is a true pope and then there's some other pope allegedly elected. So basically you have to have a two-pope situation. It can only be one true pope. And a false pope is when, this Vatican II popes, they've strayed, they've taught outright heresy, so that they keep their false popes. So that's the difference between those two. All right, how many have heard of Father Chad Ripperger? He's got some pretty good talks. Have you listened to him? He's Fraternity of St.
Yeah, the pictures of Bishop Gerard Hilaire and all the rooms in that. So they're very clear in their position on that. Now, we went through this quite a bit last year, so I don't want to take a lot of time. But the problem I have with people who are of the material formal thesis is when they make it a doctrine. And some of them do. That if you don't follow that, if you're a state of the conscious, you don't believe in the material pope theory, it's like you're not even Catholic. There's some of them that are like that. They become almost, it becomes for them like a doctrine. And it's purely a theory. And an interesting fact is that it comes from Bishop Gerard Hilaire, this idea, and it was just theorizing about the situation in the church today. And he wrote an article, which I obtained, in which he said, this was written in 1979. And he said, I accept John Paul II as a material pope because 10 of the cardinals that elected him had been appointed by Pope Pius XII. Now, if you think of what that is saying, he's implying that in the future conclave, if you don't have any cardinals from Pope Pius XII, then he wouldn't even be a material pope. And Bishop Sanborn, I sent that to him, and he admitted to me that he has taken Bishop Hilaire's theory, thesis, and he's elaborated. He's developed it. He's added to it. Okay, so I don't have a problem if someone believes that. If someone considers that thesis of the material pope idea, the problem I have is when they make it like a doctrine. And some do that. I've heard from people in Europe where there are other.
McKenna explained to me the theory about the material pope, and I actually flew to Monroe, Connecticut, and I spent 2 days talking to Bishop McKenna about this at great length. I didn't condemn him. I thought, I don't agree with this opinion, but he's entitled to his opinion, and then we're not going to say he's not Catholic or we shouldn't go to his mass or something like that. In fact, we do have a seminarian from Argentina who does hold to the material pope theory in our seminary. And I go back to the oath that Bishop Cremona wanted me to take to work for unity. And that there's gonna be difference of opinion. We gotta look at the bigger picture, and that's the salvation of souls. And so there's a lot of different aspects and ideas of where we can go, et cetera, et cetera. But I would have to just say this on my part, a lot of the opinions that I have and hold today were formed early on by a lot of those older priests who were very strong in resisting Vatican II and were very faithful to the Catholic faith. I think of Father Francis Fenton. He was a very staunch sedevacantist. There was in Mexico, Bishop Carmona, and then there was Bishop Musi, and I could name a number of priests who were very strong in the faith, and what they taught and what their opinions were has been a big influence on me of how I even think today. But once again, I think that we have to be following principles. When people ask my opinion, I oftentimes say, well, it's right here in moral theology. Let's read this right out of moral theology, or let's look at this. This is from Pope Pius, the St. Pius X, or Pius XI, or Pius XII, or Pius IX, and the Syllabus of Error, or Mortale Animos, or Mystici Corpus Christi, or here's what it says in canon law. I like to show people this is what the church teaches, and that's what we should follow too. But on the other hand, if someone has a difference of opinion for me, I think it's actually a waste of time to try to argue these things that, it will only be if and when a true pope is restored, these things are going to be settled. But until then, they're going to have their opinions, and I have my opinions, and, we shouldn't allow this to tear each other down. That's very counterproductive. So I'm not sure if you had any questions.
About in the beginning of this short lecture, Just as we see our government being infiltrated and our country being destroyed from within, that's exactly what happened in the Catholic Church. This is nothing new. The Masons said for years they would try to destroy the Catholic Church from within. The Alta Vendita was a Masonic plan to infiltrate, get men within the highest rankings of the church, even within the papacy, and to destroy the church from within. This is what we see happening. So we shouldn't doubt, we shouldn't think, maybe there might be, maybe that is the church, or maybe he's the Pope, or maybe this is, no, there's no doubt about it. It's a very, very black and white. And that's why we try to use, like I say, just a few examples of many to bring that contrast out. And we should not look to these men for the solution. Besides the Sedevacantist who say there's no Pope, and besides St. Christ X who say, well, he is the Pope, we just have to disobey him. There's some who have adopted what they call a material Pope theory. And that is that these men have been validly elected, but because of their erroneous or their heretical teachings or beliefs, God has not given them the authority. So somehow they're in between. They're elected, but they don't have. If ever it should appear that any bishop or cardinal of the Roman Church or legate, or even the Roman pontiff, prior to his promotion as cardinal, prior to his election as the Roman pontiff, has beforehand deviated from the Catholic faith or fallen into any heresy, we enact, decree, determine, define such promotion or election, even in and of itself, even with the agreement and unanimous consent of all the cardinals, to be null, legally invalid, and void. Nor shall it become possible for such a promotion or election to be deemed valid or be valid through reception of office, consecration, subsequent nomination, or possession. And it says, such promotion or election, even through the lapse of time, shall not, in the foregoing situation, be considered even partially legitimate in any way. Those promoted or elected by the very fact and without the need for any further declaration shall be deprived of dignity, position, honor, title, authority, and power and office. Now, what's interesting, we've talked about this before, on the backside is very small print, but this is the text of the Code of Canon Law 1917. And this decree of Pope Paul IV is referenced in the Code of Canon Law. How could this be? A man's part Pope, part not the Pope. He's validly elected, but he doesn't have any authority. He can appoint cardinals and bishops, but he can't speak infallibly. How do you come up with this? Where does this come from? This is not the language of the church. The church's language is this: public heretics cannot be elected to the papacy, and if a pope were to become a public heretic by the personal sin of heresy, he would forfeit, he would lose his position within the church. So there are many, many things going on out there amongst the traditionalists. You get on the internet, there's so many different opinions, etc. But the important thing is this: we have to stick with what the Catholic Church has taught. We have a little pamphlet that we put together, answering the objections to the Sedevacantist position. The whole book is just quotes from the popes, canon lawyers, theologians, doctors of the church on this very topic. If any of you would be interested in a copy of that, they might have it at the center. If not, we can send you one. But I think it's important what the Catholic Church, instituted by Christ, is going to last to the end of time, and we want to be set down or resign. Then they weren't sure who the true cardinals were. So added to the cardinals, they had come up with the idea, we need to have delegates from each country so it's balanced. Not going over.
The power of applying the papacy to such and such a person devolves on the universal church, the Church of God. So as I mentioned to Bishop Law, I think it's interesting to put that concept out there, but we are nowhere near any consideration of that, because there's not the unity that we need. And I'd also like to say this. So I know there's the other consideration of the thesis that came originally from Bishop Gerard de Laurier, the idea that these men are validly elected, and in that state they have been chosen, yet they do not have the authority because of their heresy. The problem with that, as we read from canon law, is that for the validity of the election, you have to be capable of accepting the election and exercising, you have to be capable of exercising the jurisdiction attached to the office. Otherwise, there's no election. And Canon 219 is very clear. The Roman pontiff, upon accepting his election, he comes as supreme pope. He's the supreme head of the church. He's the pope. There's no, well, this and that. No. So the bottom line is this. I think with those who hold to the thesis, I think it's unfortunate because they're still pointing people to the modern church, to the modern hierarchy, and saying, well, they legally have claim to the church. As they say, Vatican II issued in a new religion, but it's not a new church. I don't think so. It's a new religion, but not a new church. And then simply put, they would say that the conciliar churches, the conciliar popes were Catholic enough to get elected, but they're not Catholic enough to get the authority. I think that's contradictory. So that's my opinion. I think the important thing I'd like to share with you is this. When I talk to the society,
every day, be a good representative of your divine Son, Jesus. And how important it is when we think of our Lord at the Last Supper. What was his prayer for his apostles? That they might be one, as he and the Father were one. How important it is that we strive for unity amongst us. We tell the lay people, love one another. This is the greatest commandment. Well, we got to practice what we preach. We are all different. All the priests are different. God gives all of us different talents and abilities, and also faults and failings. We got our pluses and our minuses. God gives us some talents in one area, but not maybe in another. And how important it is that we use our talents for God's greater honor and glory, and that we help and assist one another. How important it is that we avoid division. In things that are certain, there has to be unity. In matters of faith, there has to be unity. In matters that are opinion, there can be liberty. Just because someone doesn't follow your opinion or doesn't accept your opinion doesn't mean anathema. No. It means that if someone has a lawful, legitimate opinion, and before all the apostasy in the church, there were differences of opinion. They didn't come in to condemn each other, just difference of opinion. And so the church finalizes and makes a determinate decision on a matter, still open for discussion. But we have to avoid division. But let's not think that our situation is unique. Have there been problems in the past? Of course there have been. To me, it seems like in this day and age, all of the attacks of Satan on the church are all combined. If we look through the whole history of the church, we're getting a combination of all those attacks. And how important it is that we think of Christ and that we truly stay united.
And it is also time to put aside the contorted theories of the tribal mythmakers who destroy the papacy to save it. You can now see with your own eyes and hear with your own ears the poisonous modernist heresies of Vatican II, incarnate in the person of Jorge Mario Bergoglio. He is destroying Catholic faith. He is destroying Catholic morality for untold millions of souls, now and for centuries to come. As such, he is no mere bad dad with an unused infallible stamp in his back pocket. Still less is he the vicar of Christ. He is the vicar of the devil, and no one should be afraid to say it.
Esperar até o fim. O motivo pelo qual estou dizendo isso é porque, e vou entrar nesse assunto um pouco mais adiante, é muito lamentável que hoje na igreja existam o que chamamos de divisões infelizes entre tradicionalistas. Isso é realmente lamentável. Uma das coisas que eu queria fazer, e por isso convidei o bispo da vila, o bispo Aspenon e o bispo Aug, é que estávamos tendo uma reunião e tentando discutir o que podemos fazer para criar uma maior unidade entre os grupos tradicionais, entre os bispos tradicionais. E isso começa sentando e conversando. Então, depois do Natal e do Ano Novo, teremos outra reunião aqui em Spokane. Seremos 6 reunidos e vamos trabalhar para tentar resolver as diferenças. Agora, sempre há divergências de opinião. Isso sempre existiu na igreja. Podemos encontrar diferenças entre os santos, teólogos e canonistas, resolver as coisas. Quero dizer mais uma coisa sobre o nosso seminário. Temos estudantes estrangeiros que vêm para o nosso seminário. Temos o que é chamado de programa SEVES. Antes de 11 de dezembro, você sabe, de 2001, era fácil conseguir vistos para estudantes de fora, mas depois eles realmente apertaram as regras. Então era preciso que a sua escola fosse aprovada. E assim, quando estávamos no processo de aprovação da escola, do seminário, conseguimos também aprovar o ensino médio. Podíamos receber estudantes estrangeiros no nosso ensino fundamental e médio. Também para o nosso seminário, mas nós temos com os estudantes estrangeiros 5 anos para educá-los. Mas queremos um ano extra, um 6º ano, em que eles estejam nos Estados Unidos, trabalhando com nossos padres. Uma coisa é passar pelas aulas e pela teoria. É outra coisa. Você é como um aprendiz, como um estagiário. Você ainda quer ter um padre jovem com um padre mais velho, para que, quando ele fizer as coisas pela primeira vez, funerais, casamentos.
The thesis of Gerard de Laurier does not say that Bergoglio is a validly elected pope. That's false. It's a false accusation. We say, the thesis says that he is validly elected and is therefore a pope elect, but that he is not the pope. He is not a validly elected pope. Pope could never be said of him for as long as he is promulgating heresy.
La questione delle cosiddette ipotesi del Papa eretico non ha alcun interesse se non storico, in quanto la soluzione che Monsignor Gerard de Laurier dava sul fatto che la sede di Pietro sia vacante oppure no, era fondata ed è fondata su altro motivo, cioè sull'intenzione oggettiva e abituale di procurare il bene della Chiesa. È quello che vi ho spiegato prima. Il vero Papa, il Papa che è Papa formalmente, è una sola cosa con Cristo e abitualmente, quotidianamente, in maniera magari più o meno perfetta, ma sempre buona, guida il gregge verso la verità, la allontana dall'errore, gli procura i veri sacramenti, gli dà una disciplina che è conforme al Vangelo, eccetera. Questo in maniera abituale. Se ciò non accadesse, né Cristo è con lui, né lui è con Cristo, e quindi non è legittima autorità. Questo è il nostro modo di ragionare, che prescinde dall'eresia oppure no. Ma allora, nell'ipotesi che un Papa possa cadere in eresia, l'Auditoria dice non è possibile, si fonda su un documento che poi è stato dimostrato spurio, può darsi, ma resta pur sempre il fatto che i teologi successivamente non hanno considerato questa ipotesi come contraria alla fede e ne hanno esaminato, seppur in via ipotetica, la possibilità. Questo significa che nessun teologo ha trovato in questa ipotesi qualche cosa di impossibile, di contrario alla fede. Per esempio, i teologi non fanno l'ipotesi che cosa succede se le persone della Trinità sono 4, evidentemente. Questo è evidente. Comunque, che ne sia, che sia possibile o non sia possibile, allora.
No te olvides, el Papa puede ser hereje. No te olvides, el Papa puede ser hereje. No hay necesidad del juramento antimodernista, nosotros somos tradicionales. Sí, Excelencia. No hay necesidad del juramento antimodernista, nosotros somos tradicionales. Sí, Excelencia. No hay necesidad del juramento antimodernista, nosotros somos tradicionales. Sí, Excelencia.
Queridos hermanos, ustedes tienen conocimiento si el obispo Marco Antonio Pivarunas, por escrito, tiene un solo documento firmado donde defina que Roma no es parte de la iglesia. En sus conferencias, en sus pláticas, él es como Monseñor Lefebvre. Tiene lo que todos quieren escuchar. En documento, tiene firmado un documento que es que no se opone, que bajo ciertas circunstancias se asista a la Santa Misa, celebrada en comunión con un falso papa, con uno que predica contra Cristo, que preside una organización que lleva las almas al infierno. ¿Por qué es la confusión? Porque se aparta del magisterio de la iglesia. Porque se admiten las opiniones heréticas. Pero ¿quién hace la confusión? Los obispos, las cabezas, los sucesores de los apóstoles. ¿A qué se debe todo esto? Del obispo Marco Antonio Pivarunas, que él se autonombra como un gran católico, de una familia supercatólica. ¿Por qué? Porque esos son los efectos de la infiltración judía, que todo lleva a Roma apóstata. ¿Será papa o no será papa? Son cuestiones opinables, hay que esperar a que venga un papa y lo decida. Es evidente que no es la Iglesia Católica. Ellos dicen que hay que hacer reuniones para acabar las divisiones entre los tradicionalistas. No, señor, hay que seguir el magisterio de la Iglesia. ¿Qué tantas reuniones? Después de que ellos lo han descompuesto, ahora dicen, ¿por qué habrá divisiones? No lo sabemos. Por no hacer documentos, por no definir, por quedarse en las meras opiniones. Que eso lo define claramente Santo Tomás de Aquino en la Suma Teológica. Cuando la persona pierde la fe, o cuando se aparta de un solo punto de la fe católica, pierde la fe por completo y viene a tener meras opiniones. ¿Qué tenemos hoy? Opiniones. ¿A qué se debe? Es el fruto maduro de una infiltración judía, a la cual no se combate, de la cual no se enseña cómo se trama la infiltración judía, cómo es la masonería eclesiástica, cómo opera. Simplemente todo es buena voluntad, no sabemos por qué pasaron las cosas. El obispo Marco Antonio Pivarunas tiene conocimiento expreso de una organización judío-masónica que está en México, que tiene más de 60 sacerdotes, de la cual él es parte. ¿Y qué hace? Nada. Silencio. Y si recibe al judío o al maestro del Talmud de Isidro Puente Ochoa y le dice, quédate 2 días más con nosotros para que conozcas el seminario. ¿Usted qué piensa de esto? ¿Usted cree que un obispo celoso de la gloria de Dios guardará silencio ante Roma apóstata? ¿Usted cree que eso es amar a Cristo? ¿Qué diría nuestro Señor Jesucristo? Que se compara a su vicario con quien predica en contra de Jesucristo. Amados hermanos, vamos a terminar. Yo le encomiendo que escuche la voz del magisterio de la iglesia. Un papa no puede decir herejías. Si dice herejías es la señal de que no es el papa. Pero Marco Antonio Pivarunas, el obispo, es el encargado de sembrar la división a través de las opiniones. Yo ahora quería hacer una reunión y vamos a hacer un cónclave para que salga un pequeño Pivarunas. Oh señora mía, oh madre mía, yo me ofrezco enteramente a vos y en prueba de filial afecto, os consagro en este día mis ojos, mis oídos, mi lengua y mi corazón. En una palabra todo mi ser, ya que soy todo vuestro, oh madre de bondad, guardadme y defendedme como cosa y posesión vuestra, si sea benedictio Diego omnipotentes, Patris et Filii et Spiritus Sancti, decena super vos, et manex semper, amén. Que Dios y María Santísima les bendigan. Amadísimos hermanos, si gustan cooperar, pueden hacerlo a esta cuenta para la propagación del magisterio. Aquí hay 12 celulares WhatsApp para que se puedan comunicar con un servidor. Los invito a dialogar, los invito a participar. Si están no están de acuerdo, con muchísimo gusto lo platicamos. Esta es su casa, ese es su espacio y gracias a Dios estamos trabajando en ello. Que Dios y María Santísima les bendigan, amadísimos hermanos.
Attende Domine et miserere, quia peccavimus tibi. A te vexum mei, omnium redemptor, oculo